March held just down the street from here in downtown Denver. Headlining the rally in Civic Center Park that day was Greta Thunberg, that internationally renowned Swedish climate activist. Less known, but just as present, was Earth Guardians, a Colorado-based organization that represents thousands of young activists, artists, and musicians who find themselves at the forefront of driving action toward a regenerative, sustainable future. This evening, representing Earth Guardians is Leala. Please give Leala a warm Mile High Theology. Leland, thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you would please tell us about what led you into climate activism. So it's like the first part of the question, and then the second part, if you would tell us about the work of Earth Guardians.
Of course. So my passion in environmental activism started around the Standing Rock climate rights. And there was for those of you who don't know, there was a pipeline going up on the Standing Rock Reservation, and the tribal members started to fight back against it, and it ended up catching nationwide media attention. And this is kind of the first time I was able to see the climate crisis framed as like a humanity issue versus seeing the classic pictures of the polar bears on the melting ice caps and things like that. So that definitely kind of ignited it within me, but it was also something that I grew up with. I was raised to believe that we're stewards of the land, not owners. So it's kind of always been a part of me, and then with the Standing Rock movement, it started mobilizing me, inspiring me to do more. And then through that, I started volunteering with Earth Guardians when I was around 16. I volunteered with them on and off for a little bit, and then I was asked to help them plan the first ever Indigenous youth training. It's a leadership training, so the goal is to give them the skills and tools they need to grow upon that back in their own communities. And then from there, I was invited to join the youth council. And on the youth council, I helped work with several campaigns, including our Revolutionized for Vote campaign, which was really focused on the 2020 election, and also kind of showed that we're an environmental justice organization, and that kind of means there's many different layers to it, so it's not always explicitly the environment, while voting is definitely something that overlaps. People in office have to be able to be pro-environment, so that's kind of where our activism comes in there. And then I became the social media manager for Earth Guardians, and a year later I got promoted to a communications director.
So you're the right person for us to talk to.
Yeah.
So tell us more about the work of Earth Guardians, what sort of its mission and its goals are.
Yeah. So Earth Guardians is a global organization, and we strive to inspire youth to make change within their own communities and their impact on the earth, to do good by the environment through community projects. And so we actually have crews all over the world. When we say crews, it's a group of young individuals who have the same passion to help the earth, to help clean up their community, give back to their community. And we also, like I mentioned earlier, we do more centralized campaigns as well. Like the voting campaign that was specific to America, but we also again have projects all over the world. In Brazil right now, they're doing a 7K tree project where their goal is to plant 7,000 trees, and they've already planted mostly 1,200. That is really awesome. And then in India, they're starting a project to train a tribal indigenous women to become beekeepers. And it's super cool. And the goal of that is to not just give them, the tools to become a beekeeper, but to also how to process the honey, and then from there, how to sell it, and then it becomes a way to stimulate their economy as well as being generous with it. So it's definitely a very inspiring thing to watch, youth all over the world wanting to make a difference in their community, and then, being able to do it, and then us being able to help them do it. Really
Well, it sounds like the work of the Guardians is very contextual.
awesome.
So, like wherever in the world that people are, that's the kind of projects that engage them in. In
Yes, exactly. It's a perfect fit
So when you and I talked last month, you have said that non-Indigenous people readily acknowledge, often, and specifically kind of in liberal circles, readily acknowledge that Indigenous knowledge is key to resolving the conflicts. So that is key. But non-Indigenous people are less ready to center and listen to actual Indigenous people. Can you say more about that?
of course. So there's definitely been this, switch into, like you're saying, global circles and looking at the environmental crisis. There's definitely, they believe that indigenous practices are the way to go. You look in California, and they just started doing the controlled burns again. But during the whole 20th century, those tribes were banned from doing those controlled burns because they were told that it just wasn't right. It's not right to burn trees. But in the end, that ended up being more degrading the land more because it overdue for these big fires. And I mean, not those big fires that we had last summer and the summer before that and this summer. And so now that they're kind of, this new wave of environmentalism is, yes, let's look at indigenous ways of lives. They almost kind of see us as this like mystical magic, or we can solve the universe, we've got the power to do it, that wise native folk. Um, and and they fail to see the reality of that you can't have that knowledge without the indigenous peoples. So you can't, hang on to that knowledge, you can't learn that knowledge if we're struggling and we need support. And these indigenous communities across the world, um, we just are having a hard time and they need support, whether it be from food deserts to drug abuse problems to suicide epidemics. All these things are going on, and we have to address them as a society, and we have to be able to support indigenous communities before we can even start using the knowledge to fix
So basically, you're saying that the approach, the wisest approach, is probably you can't basically, and Tinker kind of alluded to this last month on the podcast. There's no way to sort of separate people from land. And if we're seeking to take care of the land, we have to take care of people. If we're seeking to take care of people, we have to take care of the land. I mean, it's not a.
Yeah, it's a circular process for sure. And indigenous people make up less than, I want to say, 2% of the global population, but they protect over 80% of the world's biodiversity. And that's there's no disputing that. But what you don't see is in those indigenous communities, they're each having their own fight, they're each having their own problem. Just after years of systemic colonialism that has caused this and everything. So it's just kind of being able to recognize that yes, we do have that wisdom and that power, but we also have other things that we do outside of hate making outside support. We're pretty resilient people, so
It's a coalition building.
yes, exactly.
I'm Roger, your host of now Theology Manager, and I'm kind of activist in Earth Garden. So Leela, how does Earth Guardians measure success, if you will? And I did air quotes for our listeners.
Yeah, so success is just, looking at what these peers and these youth are able to bring to their communities, from the skills and the training and the resources that we were able to give them. And so, like I was mentioning earlier, with EG Brazil, through our project grant program, they were able to, start that tree planting project, and we're about to launch a fundraising right now for the Earth Guardians and the beekeeping project. And there's just so many, those are pretty large scale projects, but then you look at like Earth Guardians Omaha, and those youth just spent an afternoon in a park doing a bird spot survey. So it's definitely, there's different scales of it. So, Camden's success, like putting air quotes, was pretty accurate because it's just a matter of, what the impact of that community is. And how we were saying earlier, the context of each community changes. And what each community needs is different. And we're a global org, so, crews in Central Africa are going to have very different, different projects, different needs that would be addressed in the community than the Harvard Basket. So just being able to just see what our crews are doing and how they can inspire others.
And so, and the success is not it's not so much this abstract thing, like it's more, it's very concrete, it sounds like.
Yeah. And success, I guess when you look at success, it could be any event that the crew puts on, no matter, how many people are showing up. That crew, they're able to use the leadership skills, the organizational skills, that we've been giving them, and they're able to put on something fun and build off of those skills that we do.
When we talked last month, I was really struck when I asked you about some assumptions that would be helpful for all of us who are listening to us. And one of those assumptions that you said is we need to stop saying climate change is coming, it's already here. So if you would just expound on that, what are some other assumptions that you would like for us to leave this episode kind of journey?
Yeah. So yes, that climate change, is already here, but it's also not in the sense of, the birds, the bees, and the trees. So that there's also, people layered living, that's people that are affected in ways that we might not necessarily see exactly. Like for example, I think we talked about this in our podcast month, is a lot of Indigenous women and girls go missing around pipelines. And so Indigenous communities in general have a very high percentage of missing murdered Indigenous women. And when we look at reservations that have pipeline on it, these companies will kind of import their labor. So they'll bring in men from their company, union men, from all over the country, put them in this really desolate area, and they're living in um, temporary housing units. And this is what we call man camps. And from there, we see a genuine spike in violent crimes, whether it be like robbery or assault charges. And we also start to see the Indigenous women in those areas. Because a lot of these pipelines are on Indigenous land, are on this land that we're kind of pushed on because it was desolate land. They were kind of, oh, they'll die out over there. Let's just leave them over there. And then we did it, and then now suddenly there's these troves of oil, and now it's, oh, we got that one again. So it's just whole history repeating itself. And so because of that, it's directly putting harm in those communities. And that is an environmental issue. That need for us to keep drilling oil is starting to affect these communities in ways that you might not necessarily think of when you think of the environment or the climate or the earth. So yeah, I think it's definitely more complex issue than people who are just getting into learning about climate change and environmentalism. Like I was saying earlier, it's not just the polar bears and the melting ice caps. Don't get me wrong, it's really sad. It gets me every time. But there's still so much to it that we don't see. Coastal indigenous peoples across the world are losing their homes, and there's just so much.
I mean, what a helpful framing. I know Christina and I, when we met with you last month, that was new to us. Hearing, I think we had both heard about, kind of the scourge of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but I've never heard sort of, the foundation of that, kind of this outsourced work coming in onto reservations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is a helpful framing and assumption that we can all walk away with. Another one that you mentioned that I really appreciated was acknowledge Indigenous peoples as individual human beings. And you said, while Indigenous people hold knowledge that can heal the planet, that is not their only contribution to society. So say a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, so I think, as you were saying earlier, Indigenous knowledge has the key to solving environmental issues, but Indigenous is such a general term. There's Indigenous people across the globe, and within each country, there's different tribes, and then within each tribe are individual people, individual artists and teachers, and and they're people as well. They're not just this large abstract concept. They're individuals that have dreams and have things to contribute that unfortunately a lot of them can't do because of the systemic issues that we deal with. And so it's definitely, sometimes I think about that and when people refer to Indigenous people, so is that just, like, I don't know, like, are you visualizing a bunch of individuals, or are you visualizing, like, just some weird, abstract, intangible, like, one entity? And, I like to write. I know a lot of Native artists. My friend is going to school to become a doctor, and she's Pueblo. And so there's just this, as individuals, we have more to give than just that stereotypical wise Indian trope. Is yes, we do have that wisdom, we can share it, but that's not just our sole purpose.
Yes, basically we talked about this too. A lot of Black Americans face that as well, that, they're in the white kind of supremacist imagination of, Native peoples do this, Black people do this, and then whenever people defy kind of those boundaries or those basically restrictions on their humanity, then it's confusing to people because it's like, well, I thought you were just meant for this. And it's like, no, there are more dimensions. Yeah. So I love that, those assumptions that we can all walk away with. The missing, the horror of missing and murdered Indigenous women is actually connected to environmental abuse, and it becomes domestic abuse. The humanity of Indigenous peoples as not just an abstract category, but human beings who are meant for more than just showing the rest of us how to get any other assumptions that you think you want more people to walk away with?
Just that, like, again, going back to that very original sentiment, I really think that the climate crisis, like, is already here, and we keep saying, oh, it's coming, while, it comes on fire. So it's like, and I definitely think it's like a sort of vision that the media perpetrates, is that it is this far off thing that, like, we always see those headline articles that like, oh, the UN just released that now we have to apply this thing. And so, and I think by reporting it like that, people get in their minds that, like, I don't know, like, if they explode on that day or something. But in reality, it will be this slow, drawn out process. And a lot of people are already experiencing a lot of houselessness comes from environmental issues, and it's just, like I was saying, it is then just so layered, and that it's something we need to address now on all levels. Because even a lot of social justice issues can stem, you can trace it back to environmental issues. So it's just, there's so many things that we need to just start with, and that's the bottom line, is just acknowledging that there is a climate issue that is already here, and that people already know.
Well, thank you for your wisdom, for your expertise, and sharing that with us tonight. We have a few minutes for, actually, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, which is great. Because Leila has given us a lot to chew on. So any questions from anyone? And if we are live streaming, for those of you at home, number one, thank you for joining us. And number two, if you have any questions for Leila, let us know and we'll get that question to her.
How do you get involved in
Oh, okay. Like talking with these, or, wait, sorry, can you repeat the question?
how do you get involved in your green?
Oh, the green project, the different projects. So within Earth Guardians, it's usually, because we do a lot of different campaigns, like we're doing one right now on social media called Of the Land, and it focuses on food sovereignty, and that was brought to us by a member on the youth council. It was something that he was super passionate about. So we as a team took it on to help him sort of showcase what's been, the research that he's put in. He's like so much awesome work. And then other times we partner with different organizations. Red the Vote was a whole coalition of 10 organizations. We're also part of the Stockton Money Pipeline Coalition, which is getting big bank money out of pipeline investments. So there's definitely a lot of different levels, like ranging all the way from, a youth in one of the communities brought this forward. This is what they want to do, and how can we help them? All the way to we're part of this coalition with like 50 organizations. So it's definitely all across the board. We have an amazing programs director who keeps that all on and shifts through what would be best.
Any other questions for Leila? Yes.
You touched on the generalization of Indigenous people and Native American ideology, which I'm so grateful for, and I'm sure our listeners are too. Do you think that youth are also being tokenized at any point during this movement, and if so, how?
And the question for those who are listening to us is, Leila has touched on tokenization of Indigenous peoples within the climate crisis movement. Does Leila think that youth have also been in some way tokenized?
Yes, definitely. Simply yes. There's definitely been, like Greta and all these other known activists who have been, the media has tokenized them and also like celebritized them, like made them celebrities. And so, that's like a whole other, whole other conversation. But in terms of like tokenizing, it's kind of been put in this mind like, oh, like this next generation is going to go like that. serious and all that, they're strong. And by getting in that mindset and like tokenizing these youth, like, oh, look at how strong they are, and like mobilizing and getting, stuff done. It's like, well, the reality behind that is their kids and you shouldn't have to be doing that. So it's just kind of this like, no, this isn't our generation specific. This isn't, going to be a problem when we're much older. This is something that's happening right now. And by kind of, putting youth at the face of the movement, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of tokenizes it and makes it more of like a, trying to make almost like a feel-good story. Like, oh, it's youth doing all this awesome stuff. But in reality, it's kind of, I'm really funny now, so I'm but I think so. But it's very like, they should be enjoying their childhood and not worrying about their planet being on fire. And the fact that they have to do this, they have to be the voice of it. I think it is very inspiring. It was very inspiring, first of all, to see all these young people do it. But it's definitely become like a weird way of presenting the media. So it's definitely there's tokenization. Yeah.
Any other questions for you? How can our listeners connect with their friends?
Yes, you can find us on our website at earthguardians.org or on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Facebook is just Earth Guardians, our name. Instagram is at Earth Guardians, and then Twitter is at Earth Guardians, but with a Z instead of an X. Yeah. So there's slight iterations of all of them, so I've got to list them all.
And since we met, I've followed Earth Guardians for about a month, and I just highly recommend it. It's just a nice, good presence. I only have Instagram, so on my Instagram feed, and it's just, that consciousness is just there. So, we shouldn't tell people what they should do on social media, but if you just do it, like do what Leela said, don't do what I said.
I'm pretty proud of our Instagram. I designed the graphics on it, so I really enjoy it.
It's also wondering if you have any insight into land back movement and the roots in American conservationism, national parks, and the associated conservation system.
Yeah.
So our listeners at home, the question basically is, Leela, will you reflect on the land back movement and reservations and federal lands?
And the roots of American conservationism.
And the roots of American conservationism. They're not really listed.
So I actually, in my first year in college, I did a whole paper on how environmentalism is very related to white supremacy. And you look back at even John Muir. He wanted to start national parks because he didn't want natives on them ruining it. In their mind, it was this perfect pristine land, and the natives were the dirty savages that were in it. So that's where the idea of national parks really began. And then of course, it developed into more positive things like protecting beautiful lands from big and large extractive companies. But that's definitely something that we always forget. And when I did my first year in college doing environmental studies, and that was kind of something that really infuriated me in every class, is that we would talk about these big like conservationist heroes, and they were really just basically racist. And so, pulling that forward today and like looking at the land back movement, a lot of people kind of get intimidated by this idea of land back because they see it as it's not an eviction notice. We're not, we're not gonna kick everybody off the land. It's just a matter of, we know how to manage this land the best, we know how to take care of it, how to nurture it. And we should be the one that has, like, we should be a part of the say in what happens with the land. And so when we talk about land back, that's really what we mean. And it's also, ties into the land that the government took from us, that was promised to us. And so there's definitely a lot of layers to it, but I see a lot of pushback on it because people automatically assume, oh, well, we all done is gone. It's like, no, we're trying to repair hundreds of years of damage, whether it be environmentalism to, just the damage to the human psyche through years of racism, genocide, and colonialism. So it's definitely a big thing. And then reservations, a lot of reservations, they were, first of all, are way smaller than what was promised in the treaties. All the treaties, they were said to be the law. Treaties are the law of the land through the Constitution. They say that. And yet America has broken every single treaty between Native Americans. Every single one. And so, a lot of these lands that they were pushed on, like I was saying earlier, are very desolate. They have, they're not good to grow things on. They're usually in the middle of nowhere, so it'll be like one grocery store within miles and miles. And so, from that, it's just, going back to how there's oil under it, so now this land is worth a bunch, and just, this historical this history between the land and indigenous people, it's always been very problematic, I guess, like from the moment, American conservationism started, and this idea that we have to protect what's beautiful about this environment. It's like, okay, well, that's what indigenous people were doing. And so it's just, it's very convoluted and very, again, layered and complex the more you bring in historical context into it. So that's, I think that it was a very good question, but thank you for asking. And so I think land back is kind of a way to rectify those mistakes, to rectify that misinterpretation of what our relationship with the land was always had, and how whether they misinterpreted from us and then turn around and misrepresented us in the land. It was just
One more question. Yes.
What do you think on conservation versus
You let us ask what your views are on conservation versus preservation.
Yes. I usually, my issue with preservation is, it just feels like the earth was always meant for us. The earth was always meant for us to have a relationship with, a give and take relationship. And because, what's been happening with the extraction companies and everything, that's what kind of brought in the idea of preservation, needing to preserve these perfect pristine areas. But in reality, it's like everything, nature is meant to be used, it's meant to support us. The problem has always been that we've never been able to, the past, 100 years, 150 years, it's been very, very actually. There's just been this idea of humanity only with the land, and we can take whatever from it, and not that it's an equal relationship. And so because of that, I usually lean more towards conservationism, but it's also like, you have to make function. I don't know, it's a very, I guess in general, I don't really remind with any of those words, and it's just kind of, like I said, a give and take relationship, and just reestablishing that equity between the two.
Let's give you discussing tonight and with Dr. Tinker last week, and that we'll see over the course of this season, is that Christianity's role, especially in the West, in our imagination about the land, our imagination about our own humanity, our imagination about what is and what isn't human, what is and what isn't animate, has in some ways impoverished not only our imaginations, but it has impoverished what the Book of Common Prayer calls this fragile earth, our island home. And I hope that what these conversations do for us over the next few months is give us the vocabulary, the imagination, and the resolve to say we are living in urgent times, in an urgent era. And the UN put out the report that you mentioned a few weeks ago. We hear it on the news, sometimes to the point of making us emotionally numb to the urgency. But the urgency is there no less. And in this era of history, it is very important for Christian people, for baptized people, to be listeners. We've done a lot of talking, and the talking has not gotten us very far. It's actually in some ways been regressive. So it's very important for us to listen to those who are wiser than us, those who have the imagination that we often do not, that we don't. And that doesn't make us bad. It just means that we need other people in order for this to work, in order for the earth to work, and in order for what Leala said to be true, that the earth is meant for us in this relationship of giving and taking. What a great image. It's not meant to be pristine, but it's also not meant to be abused. And I don't know if there's a middle ground on that, but that give and take is just such a great image. And I hope that we carry that home with us in our prayers. I hope that we carry that home with us in our advocacy politically. And I hope we carry that home with us in our relationships. That the earth is only as good as I treat another person. And another person is only as good as I treat the earth. Mile High Theology is a production of St. John's Cathedral, an Episcopal church in Denver, Colorado. I offer special thanks to our guests, Leala Pourier of Earth Guardians, our communications director and producer, Evans Owsley, our communications support, Christina Retton, our hosts, Redline Integrated Arts Center, our caterers, Sexy Pizza, and you, our valued listeners. This podcast was recorded on the land of Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We give God great thanks for the 48 contemporary tribes that are historically tied to the lands that make up the contemporary state of Colorado. Please join us next month when singer-songwriter Logan Farmer performs pieces from Still No Mother, his recently produced album that meditates on patterns and desires. Please rate and review Mile High Theology on Apple Podcasts to enhance our visual visibility. Thank you. God bless you. See you next month.